is a very interesting topic for many reasons, and one of them is that, at least in America, people associate entrepreneurship with begging somebody for money. So there's a huge selection of people like asking for venture capital funding, and then if you look and kind of go into the people that are dealing out the money and their philosophy, it may be very different than the way you personally view the world. Like I have spent a lot of time in the Bay Area living there, and I just personally just do not agree, like philosophically, with libertarianism, anarchism, concentration of wealth. Those are all things I just don't believe in. I think it makes the world a bad place. So then, if I was going to be an entrepreneur, then I would beg these people who I don't agree with for money, and then they become my boss. So I don't really even call that entrepreneurship. I would say the solopreneurship or freelancing is actually entrepreneurship. And so now the question with this is like, how do you actually succeed? Because if you have zero money, how can you possibly survive? And I think that's probably the trickiest initial problem to overcome. And so I'd say a few ways to start with this would be that the ideal scenario is to start with a situation where you're currently employed. So if you have some revenue from a job, it's much easier to kind of go into the mode where you're going to start off on your own. And the I would say the number one problem isn't necessarily getting work or figuring out what product to sell, et cetera. The number one problem is, can you survive? That's the number one problem. And so there's actually there's a lot of ways to do this. So one of them is, if you had, let's say, a couple years worth of living expenses, that might be good enough. And so you maybe you don't need to do anything. Like if you are fortunate enough to live somewhere where it's low cost and you have a couple years worth of living expenses, that could be the way to go, and you initially have it. If you don't, if you live in a high cost region, this might be a time to start to think about, like, do I really need to be here? Let's take some of the highest cost places in the world: New York, the Bay Area, Canada, some of these regions, Hong Kong. There's a lot of good reasons to live there if you're going to have a corporate job. If you're going to work for yourself, there may not be a good reason to live there. And so I think that might be one of the things that's really important to first figure out, is the strategy of how do you reduce the burn rate for yourself so that you can survive long enough to be successful. And then can you actually also have, again, a couple years worth of living expenses. And I think it's amazing how many people don't talk about that with entrepreneurship. Is your personal burn rate, I think, is way more important than anything else initially, so that you can survive. And so that's phase one. So then I think then let's say that you do have this, right? You have a little bit of cushion. Maybe you've like done some data science, like everyone here knows some data science. Pick go to numbeo.com, which has cost of living rankings, and find like sweet spots, right? So find, a nice place to live that's in a city somewhere that's beautiful, potentially has got democratic values, maybe like some healthcare, maybe the number one cause of death for children isn't guns, something like that, and find that place, and then keep a very low cost of living, and then from there you can go on to phase two. So then phase two would be to think about diversification, and if you look at what a venture capitalist does, they actually are asking many people that either are an employee or even the founders to take an incredible risk, right? So they want someone to work 100-hour weeks, or put all of their time and energy into a startup. But then the venture capitalists do the opposite of that. Why? Because it's dumb to do that. It's smart to actually invest in 100 companies, and that's why they do it. And so the same thing for you is when you're figuring out what to do. The worst possible scenario is to, let's say you've got everything figured out in phase one, low cost of living, you have some money, is to put all of your eggs in one basket and then get one client that, even if they pay you double what you got paid when you're working for somebody else, that's bad because you've got all your eggs in one basket, and eventually all clients turn bad, right? And for whatever reason, it could be they leave, they could want to consume all of your resources, et cetera. So when you're in the consulting phase, it's important to have, let's say, like three clients, some kind of level of diversifications. And even if you have a dream client that's paying you double what you get paid regularly, you should intentionally limit that client so that you have time to prospect for more clients and also time to diversify your income. So it's kind of counterintuitive, like, oh wait, you're giving me so much money, shouldn't I put all my time? No. And this is the way you think when you're an employee, is like, oh, I got to go all in on one thing. But in fact, you want to be very careful so that ideally you would have something like 60% of your time each week would be dedicated to 3 clients who pay more than enough for you to survive and even earn a profit that you can keep. But then the other maybe couple of days of the week, let's say you work 1 day each for each person, you could spend time, either looking for other things to do, or even better, working on things where you get paid when you don't have to physically be there. And that's where writing books, creating content, investing, those kinds of things come in. And so this is something I wrote about in a book that was like halfway finished. At some point I might finish it, called Red, Yellow, Green Money. And so the concept is, when you're working for somebody else that's red, that's dangerous, you think it's safe, but it's actually, especially in America is an ultra capitalist society where they fire you, basically for anything. And I think since 1980 and beyond, it really started in 1950. If you read Thomas Piketty, Capital, it's a very dense book, but it fully explains the fact that you're screwed if you're in America. Basically, you don't want to work for corporations in America because they'll extract what they need and get rid of you. So that's the red money. Even if you're getting paid $500,000 a year working for Google, you're still in trouble because you're basically, anything could go wrong. And in fact, in some sense, it's even worse getting paid $500,000 a year, because now you live in the Bay Area, you have a mortgage that's $10,000 a month, and then how are you ever going to replace that income? You can't. They pay you more than anyone else does, and now you may even have to do unethical things because you're forced to pay your mortgage. So I personally think the red money is very dangerous. Instead, it would be good to live somewhere that's low cost, work remote for one of those corporations, temporarily put the majority of the money away. And then you go to yellow money, which is what I was just discussing. And that's really the consulting angle, where you have two, 3 clients. And again, the beautiful thing about consulting is that, especially if you've done it, if you start to do it for like a few years, is what you realize is you instead of getting fired constantly, you're firing other people. And you're basically saying, oh, you're unethical, I want to work with you, or your values don't represent my values, I'm not going to work with you, or you're a jerk to me, I'm not going to work with you. Or you could just say, hey, this is great, you're one of my core clients, we're all on the same page. You have a lot of power. And then additionally, because you've changed from a parasitic relationship where, like, in the corporate world, you have to basically like do whatever someone says to survive. When you have 3 clients and they know you're talented, they're very concerned about losing you, because you have basically can leave at any moment in time. And so now it's a very different relationship. So I would say the yellow money or the consulting, there's a lot to like about that, because you have power over your life. Maybe in many cases for the first time ever, someone has power over their life. And so what I would define as power over your life is when you wake up in the morning, you can do whatever you want. Most people, when they wake up in the morning, they cannot do whatever they want. They have to do what their boss tells them to do. And maybe even for like a week, you could get away with doing whatever you want, or 2 weeks. Eventually, you will have to do what someone says. If you're consulting, you really don't, because you have multiple sources of income. And if, again, one of the people you're working with, they seem to be unpleasant, or just for whatever reason you don't want to work with them, then you can get rid of them. Now, there's danger, because you have to constantly keep the 3 balls in the air, right? And you have to juggle those 3 balls. But in my opinion, it's a better way to go through life. Now, That's still the yellow, because there's some danger there, because you still have to work, because everything ultimately depends on your output. If you're a super productive person, you could do that forever. In fact, there's a book called Million Dollar Consultant, and I've read it twice. And the person that wrote it is actually legit, because I've done the same thing he's done, and I would vouch that he's saying the truth. But I think there's even a better scenario than Million Dollar Consultant, which is green money, which is that the dream scenario is you work really, really hard and you create intellectual property of some kind, and then the intellectual property pays you for the rest of your life. So that could be YouTube channel, it could be a book, it could be courses, build a course for data camp. It could be lots of different things. You could have an Airbnb, you could have a rental property, whatever it is that you're choosing to do, or it could be a combination of all of those. And that's what I would call the green money. And you've heard this in maybe different forms, but basically, if you don't figure out a way to make money while you sleep, I think Warren Buffett said this: you're going to work for the rest of your life. That's simple. So I think that's the ultimate scenario, is a combination of the yellow money and the green money, consulting and the passive income. And again, it could be a combination of things. And even a better is if the passive income is non-correlated, right? So like an Airbnb and like a book on technology are very uncorrelated. They have almost nothing to do with each other. That's great. Like if you can kind of piece together things. And once you start to build assets like that pay you out, it really doesn't have to be a huge win. If you get paid $150 a month for one thing and $1,000 from another, and then $500 from another, and you start to add it up, eventually it turns actually into a big deal. But it can take a long time. It can take years and years and years to build that up. But I would argue that the alternative is pretty dire, especially again, if you read books like by Robert Reich, Berkeley professor, or Thomas Piketty, and you start to look at what's actually happening in the world and the way that the corporate structure is, it's very scary. And so you could make the argument that you have no choice, even if you don't want to actually have something where you're working for yourself. The alternative is the CEO will get paid $1,400, $2,000, $5,000 times what you get paid, and eventually you just get discarded. So do you even have a choice but to do something that has some solopreneurship involved in it? So that's probably my like 20 minutes of propaganda.